You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and it's that time again to make some predictions, this time for week number 12 of the NFL, coming off the heels of a really fun, snowy Thursday night football where the Browns came in, pulled off a big upset victory. They kicked me in the nuts, put me at 0-1 for the week, but we have plenty of other games to decide on. This is a shorter week as far as total number of games being played. There's only 13 games this week. We already have one done, which means we only have 12 picks to make. This doesn't happen too often, but it is one of those weeks. That being said, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. We'll dive into these predictions here. Let me hear your thoughts, your opinions on the matchups, who you think's going to win, what am I getting right, what am I getting wrong. Let me hear from you. But starting off first, we have, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs going into Carolina to take on the Panthers. Now, looking at this matchup first and foremost, the Carolina Panthers defense sitting on 31 points per game allowed this season. They are by far the worst defense in terms of points per game given up. With Kansas City coming in scoring about 24, I've got a good feeling that there is a chance that we see Kansas City potentially push near that 30 margin, somewhere within that ballpark. As far as the actual matchup goes itself, though, some things I'm looking at here. Firstly, Kansas City on the ground. Obviously, you have Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins there, Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, all the big names you want to throw out there. But I'm going to be looking at how Carolina is able to defend the ground attack in KC. Running back Isaiah Pacheco has been limited in practice this week, and there is potential for him to return in this ball game here. Now, I would say if he ends up playing, there's probably going to be somewhat of a pitch count on him. I don't think that they would just full-blown let him come back, running back one, and just get after it. Probably going to want to ease his way back in. And that's all possible because of the fact that Kareem Hunt has been really good for this Chiefs team. And honestly, a big reason why this team has been able to rip off the record they have at 9-1 this season, keeping that offense balanced. With 509 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 3.7 yards per attempt, going up against a Carolina run defense that's allowing 160 yards per game on the ground, which is the league high. I think that there is a good chance we see the Chiefs look to ground and pound their way to a victory in this one here. The other thing I'm going to be looking at here is Carolina's pass protection versus Kansas City's pass rush. When you look at what KC's done this year, only 19 sacks, so not necessarily the greatest by any means. They're tied for 27th in the league right now in total number of sacks. They're 27th in sack rate, 20th in pressure. They have not necessarily been that great. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because Carolina, for what it's worth, their offensive line has been pretty good in pass protection. It's one of those things that is one of the few things that has not been bad in what has been a not so great season here. You look at just 18 sacks allowed, which puts them tied for 5th in the NFL right now as far as lowest is concerned. 6th in sack rate allowed, 11th in pressure rate allowed. They are one of the better pass protecting offenses here. And if Kansas City can't get after Bryce Young, who has looked, solid, I guess you could say, is solid the right word for that one, since his return from being benched, there could be a chance that maybe Carolina finds some success here. You also have, of course, Chuba Hubbard in the backfield, who just got paid a few weeks ago. He's been extremely productive for Carolina, and maybe he could get the ball going on the ground here. But I do think that the big thing for me is just how much pressure Kansas City can get on Bryce Young, because I think if they can make him uncomfortable, they could force him into some mistakes here, and it could wind up being a runaway performance if they do that. That being said, as for who I think is going to win this contest here, I think I am going to go ahead, take the easy way out on this one, and go Kansas City. There's always a possibility something crazy could happen, but I like the Chiefs in this one here. Coming off a loss, they want to bounce back and get right back on track and making sure that they can secure that number 1 seed in the playoffs. So I like the Chiefs 27-17. Carolina, for what it's worth, has had some solid upset performances this year with 3 wins, but for me, and I've said this before, I just have a really hard time picking Carolina. So if I pick Carolina to lose every single game of the season and I get 4 of the games wrong, so be it. But I don't think this will be one of those games. I'm sure I'll eat my words for saying that, but I don't think it'll be one of those games. Next matchup, we have NFC North clash between the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears. First thing I am looking at here, Sam Darnold. I know Vikings fans have some gripes with me as I've been fairly critical of Sam Darnold. Beyond his time in Minnesota, I don't think anyone has really been too high on Sam Darnold up until this season, and now it seems like Sam Darnold supporters are coming out of the woodwork, so it's interesting to say the least. But he has a tough matchup this week against the Chicago Bears. Pass coverage altogether. Chicago's been extremely effective defending the pass, whether it's their defensive backs or even their linebackers. They have been an extremely good unit dropping back into coverage. Chicago's 7 touchdowns allowed is tied for fewest, passing touchdowns allowed is tied for fewest in the league right now, and they are 9th in passing yards allowed with about 197 per game. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because, again, tight unit, they've been pretty good, and on top of that, Sam Darnold has been prone to making some mistakes throwing the football this year. He has thrown 10 interceptions, and Chicago, pretty aggressive unit. They've got some ball hawks in that secondary, so if they can keep things tight, limit what they're doing through the air, maybe come away with an interception or two, Chicago could really complicate this game for Minnesota. You also have to keep in mind, he does have a guy like Justin Jefferson he's throwing to, second in yards this season right now, about 15.5 yards per reception. So he, of course, has guys like him, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, of course. But I do think that this will be a really fun matchup to watch, just how well Sam Darnold is able to handle a pretty good secondary and just overall group of guys that can drop back in Chicago. The other thing I'm looking at, staying on quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, and how he handles this Vikings pass rush. This Vikings pass rush is one of the best in the NFL. They are extremely disruptive. The amount of blitzes that they run each and every single week it's unbelievable, the amount of things that they can do over there. And Brian Flores is clearly having himself a field day each and every single week, terrorizing quarterbacks, and he has no issues at all sending that blitz. And Caleb Williams, he's been struggling. He hasn't thrown a touchdown since the bye week. And on top of that, I mean, you look at what he does against pressure when he's uncomfortable, not necessarily great. He only has an interception, only a couple touchdowns, about 500 yards thrown, but that 47% completion rate is what really kind of scares me away from him in this matchup here. You couple that with the fact that, like I said, Minnesota, they have been a juggernaut. 4th in sacks this season with 35 on the year, 5th in sack rate, 7th in pressure rate, and the Vikings also lead the league in interceptions on top of that. This is a game where if they get Caleb Williams uncomfortable and they force him into some of the bad throws we have seen him make when he's uncomfortable, this kind of feels like a nightmare situation for the Bears offense here. The other thing I do think to try to help mitigate some of those issues is going to be whether or not DeAndre Swift is able to find any actual success against the Vikings run defense. As we just talked about, the pass rush, incredible. The defensive front, though, as a whole, whether it's going after the quarterback or defending against the run, phenomenal. That defensive front as a whole, in every facet of the game that they have to play, they are effective and they can stop whatever it is that they're facing here. Chicago is a better offense when DeAndre Swift is effective and he's moving the football and he's helping the offense stay afloat. They are 3-2 when he crosses 70 yards or more on the ground. However, when you look at the record and those couple of losses, one of the losses was like 120, 130-yard performance against Washington when they lost on the Hail Mary. So, I mean, he did his part in that game there. They just ultimately lost on a, bad luck situation. And then last week, of course, a loss to the Packers where he went over that margin again as well. But ultimately, they ended up losing off of a blocked field goal. So when DeAndre Swift is running, the Bears are in a good opportunity to win the football game. He has 635 yards on the year, averaging 4.1 yards per attempt. He's punched the ball in 5 times as well on the ground here. But again, Minnesota, 2nd in the league in rushing yards allowed to running backs right now. They are 1st in total rushing yards per game allowed with just 74 per game. They have the 4th best run stuff rate in the league. I am a little bit worried about Chicago's offense as a whole in this matchup here, and that's why I'm leaning heavily Minnesota Vikings. But these NFC North games have been pretty wonky this season. It's funny because I say this a lot about the AFC North matchups, very tight, close-knit games, defensive heavy. That is kind of what I'm thinking for this game here too. I would not be shocked after the run for their money that the Bears gave the Packers last week if the Bears don't do something similar to the Vikings this week as well. So I have the Vikings, and I very much want to take the Vikings for the win here, and I'm pretty confident they'll win. But I do think that they keep it very close, and there's a good chance that with things starting to get colder, game's going to be outdoors in Chicago. Maybe we got some wind going as well, not necessarily the most comfortable temperatures in the world. Defenses went out. you get something along the lines of like Vikings win 19-17 low-scoring affair. That's kind of what I have my eyes on for this matchup here. So don't be shocked if Chicago keeps it close. These NFC North games have all been very close this year, whether it's been higher-scoring affairs or lower-scoring affairs. They've all been decided by close margins, and I think we're going to keep seeing some of that again this week here. Next, we have an AFC South matchup. This one between the Tennessee Titans and the Houston Texans here. Tennessee's O-line versus Danielle Hunter, Jonathan Grenard, and Tim Settle is going to be the first thing I will have my eye on in this game here, because those three guys combined for 20 sacks on the year and 139 pressures. Houston has been very disruptive against the pass, especially going after the quarterback and rushing after him. And when you look at what Tennessee's O-line has done this year, you look at the 33 sacks allowed, the highest pressure rate in the league allowed at about 44%. Whether it's Will Levis or Mason Rudolph, whoever it is that's under center for them, I believe it's Will Levis that's still getting the start as things currently stand. But if somehow Mason Rudolph finds his way in there for whatever the reason may be, I'm a little bit worried about whoever it is that's standing back there and throwing the football here. Houston has been on fire the last week since, not on fire. That's not the right word to say. They found their footing last week in their matchup against a down-and-out Dallas Cowboys team is probably the better way to put that. And then going up against a similar situation in a Tennessee Titans team, no answer at quarterback, struggling on the offensive line. I am very curious to see how the O-line of Houston does hold up against guys like Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry, but I do think that the key thing here is just, can Tennessee hold up to what Houston's bringing after him? There's enough weapons on Houston's end that while I do have some interest in what's going to happen between Tennessee's D-line and Houston's O-line, I'm more so concerned about how Tennessee's going to hold up. The other thing I'm keeping an eye on here is going to be Tennessee's running backs versus Houston, just in their run defense as a whole here. Houston's been really good against the run and against running backs, allowing just 82 yards per game, which is good for 10th in the NFL, sixth best overall run stuff rate. However, they are allowing about 4.5 yards per attempt overall. And then with the rushing yards per game being so low, it is worth noting when you look at the numbers here, Houston is in the bottom third in the NFL right now in terms of rushing attempts seen as a defense. They've only seen 267 runs come their way. Again, putting them in the bottom third of the league here. So while their numbers are really good, their yards per attempt average is not necessarily the best. And it leads me to wonder if maybe those numbers are slightly lower just because they're not seeing as much running here. And with Tennessee and the struggles at quarterback that they've had, Tony Pollard, now that Tajay Spears is back in the fold, maybe we see some more of a dedication to the run in this matchup, so to say. And then the last thing I have here, Tennessee's secondary going up against Houston's passing attack now that Nico Collins is back in the fold here. I think things could get a little bit complicated for Tennessee. You also look at the fact that L'Jarius Sneed's heading to the IR, and considering we're in week 12 right now, Week 16, as I believe it's either week 16 or 17, however those weeks go over. So, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, so he could be back at the soonest week 17. He's probably done for the season, I would have to imagine here at this point. No sense in him coming back to play just one or two more games at the end of the year. So your secondary is getting a little bit thinner. Nico Collins is back. He caught 4 catches for 54 yards last week against Dallas. That opened things up for some of the other guys catching footballs as well. You look at Tank Dell, who also had 54 yards. Joe Mixon caught 44 out of the backfield. Schultz and Mechie each had 33 yards apiece as well. Tennessee's numbers against the pass are pretty good, so there is that going for them. They're actually allowing only 164 yards per game, which is the best in the NFL. And I kind of called this out as being a little bit fraudulent a few weeks ago, and I have since been eating a bowl of my words every single morning. So it's interesting. Tennessee, despite some of the situations that they've been dealing with over there, have been good defending the pass, and at 5.5 yards per attempt allowed, putting them near the bottom of the NFL, or not bottom, but best in the NFL, lowest in the NFL type deal. Tennessee has a chance of maybe making things a little bit tighter than you would anticipate them being. That being said, though, I do like Houston in this one here. I feel like they found their footing last week, and I think Nico Collins is really going to open up this offense again. A lot of people were jumping off the Houston Texans ship over the last couple of weeks, and while I was a little bit nervous about the direction they were going, I was trying to remind myself that they lost both Nico Collins and then Stephon Diggs, who was supposed to be the in case of emergency, you still have Diggs kind of deal. He goes down as well. They were without a true number one for quite some time, and now that Nico Collins is back in the fold, Joe Mixon is running as hard as ever. This is an offense that feels like it's going to round itself back into form, and Texans 30-17 does not seem too wildly impossible for me. So I think Houston wins. They win pretty comfortably, pretty handedly, and they walk away with a big divisional win. Now we have, and this is an interesting matchup here. I feel like this is not something I've seen a lot in my lifetime. Detroit heading into Indianapolis to take on the Colts here. Detroit's offense, first in scoring right now in the NFL, about 33.5 points per game scored. The best, unequivocally. Indianapolis, with Richardson under center, averaging about 21 points per game. Going to be a bit of an issue trying to keep pace with this offense if things do get out of hand. The way I look at this, Detroit is just, they're simply far and away a much more efficient and better offense than whatever it is that Indianapolis is fielding right now. I know that Anthony Richardson came back last week after being benched, and, he looked pretty damn good. I'll give him that going up against the Jets. 304 yards and 3 touchdowns total on the evening or afternoon, and then about 67% completion rate on top of that. By far his best game, honestly, as a pro, I guess you could say, in his short career to this point here. However, I'm trying to remind myself at this point, since I am officially now off the Jets, not even the bandwagon, I still had belief in them stupidly enough. And obviously, me saying this, I picked the Jets to beat the Colts last week. But now that I'm off that train completely and I've kind of just let it go, I'm trying to realize, okay, yeah, that was a great comeback performance from Richardson, but maybe it said more about the Jets than it did about the Colts offense and what Anthony Richardson is doing. Maybe he proves me wrong this week, but you're going up against a Lions defense that has also been pretty effective themselves, and there is some concern with the offensive line for the Colts coming into this game here, as left tackle Bernard Raymond is not going to be playing now as well. Richardson throughout the season is averaging about 44% completion rate, so I'm a little bit worried about that. You couple that with the fact that the Colts O-line has allowed the 3rd highest pressure rate against the blitz, and the Lions love to blitz the football. They are currently 5th highest in blitz rate this season. There's just a number of things that I can sit here and keep looking at as I go through this matchup, and I go, favoring the Lions over and over and over again. You couple that with me and the belief that I just don't have in the Colts defense overall to be able to slow down an offense like Detroit that can pound you into submission, that can throw the football with the best of them. Unfortunately, Colts fans, I'm sorry, and this is coming from a Colts fan, not putting a ton of stock in Indianapolis this week. I'm going to take the Lions. I'm going to take the Lions pretty comfortably as well, 35-20. Maybe the Colts do find some points here and there, but the Lions are just on another level right now, and they are tearing through opponents that are lesser than them, and unfortunately, I look at the Colts fairly lesser than I do the Detroit Lions, and I think there's a chance they might run away with this one here. So give me the Lions 35-20. They should be having a pretty comfortable victory here. Now we'll look at the AFC East in what is a battle of the bottom of the barrel in the AFC, which consists of, or the AFC East, I should say, which consists, or I guess you could say the AFC, all things considered record-wise, but the Patriots sitting at 3-8, the Dolphins sitting at 4-6, the Jets are also in there in 3-8 as well, just a bottom of the barrel AFC East altogether, and it's basically the Bills' division to lose at this point here, but we have these two teams going at it. The Dolphins need this win more than anything else. We had the news come out this past week, and for those of you that, to help you understand, I work within New England sports media, so I'm a little bit more tapped into New England's, situation overall more than anything else, just because I work in it as well. But there was the conversation and the rumors coming around about, the job security of Gerard Mayo, Alex Van Pelt, DeMarcus Covington, Elliott Wolf, and all that. And then a report came out this week from Diana Rossini that they're all safe. They're not going anywhere. So there's no real pressure in New England right now, and with Miami and the current situation they are in, they have all the pressure in the world to find wins to try to potentially sneak into the playoffs right now. So that alone makes me kind of lean a little bit more in Miami's favor for this game here, especially being in Miami as well. New England doesn't have a great track record there. The weather looks like it's actually going to be pretty nice, 75, so good weather, maybe a little bit more humid than it would be up here in New England, but that is, something that I have in the back of my my mind as well. I look at the matchup overall. New England's pass rush is not necessarily anything that I think is super effective, and when you're going up against a team like Miami, who they're all about getting into a rhythm and staying on schedule with their offense, it is very timing based, and Miami, for what it's worth, when Tua is under center, they're a very efficient offense. Tua has the fastest time to throw in the NFL by a tenth of a second, which is a pretty wide gap when you look at everyone else's numbers there. So throwing the football at 2.43 seconds makes it pretty tough for pass rushes to get to the quarterback effectively, and never mind get sacks, but just create pressure in general. New England being 21st in pressure rate, 25th in 15th in sacks with 25. They're not a super effective unit up there, so I don't know how much they're going to really be able to disrupt the rhythm of the Miami Dolphins offense. The other thing I'm looking at is like Ramondre Stevenson and how he fares against Miami's run defense. They rank 16th in rushing yards allowed to running backs right now. Stevenson, he's had a solid year, maybe a slightly better than solid year, but he has had some down moments this year as well. 600 yards almost on the season, averaging about 3.8 yards per attempt, which is not necessarily that great. And then you, of course, have the 6 rushing touchdowns as well, some things he's done as a receiver on top of that. But I just, there's so much that I'm looking at here that leads me to go, this should be a game Miami wins. And I don't want to call it a trap game for Miami because they are 4-6 themselves. They're only 1 win ahead of the Patriots right now. And the only reason they have 1 less loss is because the Pats haven't had a bye week yet. So there's just not a ton for me to really be rooting for. And so with that, I think I'm leaning Miami on this one. I could see the Patriots maybe hanging around. Drake May has looked really good, so I do got to give him some props there. He's been getting a ton of praise over the last week. You have, of course, Sean McVay in the postgame complimenting him up and down, calling him a stud, which postgame compliments mean more than pregame because you don't necessarily need to say anything nice after the fact, especially if you win. But leading into the game, you never want to give bulletin board material. So the fact that postgame Sean McVay kind of went out of his way to talk about how good May was and call him a stud, I think means a lot and holds a lot of weight considering Sean McVay and just what people think of him as an offensive mind. Then, of course, you have Kurt Warner tweeting out about it, and he's been talking about Drake May as well, saying a lot of praises about him this week. So you look at what Drake May's been doing, there is the highlights there coming from him, but I mean, you're facing Jalen Ramsey, Jordan Poyer, Javon Holland, and if Jordan Fuller's out, Cam Smith will be in his way, or in his place, but I don't know. For me, I like the Dolphins in this one here. The Patriots are in a very weird spot where they hang in there. They're competitive, but there are times where it does not feel like they're playing to win, and they feel like they're playing to try not and lose, and they end up losing anyways. So I'll take the Dolphins 29-20. I could see the Patriots maybe hanging around. I don't think they're going to lose by more than 10, but I do think Miami comes away with the win here, especially in Miami. Now we'll look at Tampa Bay going into New York to take on the Giants. Tommy DeVito is the man following the benching and then abrupt releasing today of Daniel Jones. It has been a crazy week for New York football as a whole, with just the rumor mill surrounding the Jets, firing Joe Douglas, and then what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers, and now Daniel Jones getting benched, playing on the scout team, which it sounds like he actually offered to do that and play safety, then the press conference he had, and then ultimately getting waived. It's been crazy. And I asked the question on my own Twitter account. I was just like, or X, whatever you want to call it. But just why is New York football a total dumpster fire? And it feels like every single season. I grew up with, the New York Giants and Eli Manning making those couple of Super Bowl runs and beating the Patriots. So, I always looked at the Giants as a fairly competent franchise, and the Jets, they've been the Jets my whole life, but I did watch them have some runs with Mark Sanchez and Rex Ryan in the late 2000s and in the early 2010. But it's just like my whole, and I'm sorry for those of you that are fans of these franchises. I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on them, but it's incredible to me how bad New York football is on a seasonal basis and how directionless it all feels every single season. I want to see good New York football. I was rooting for the Jets to do well. I'm rooting for the Giants to do well in spite of me basically coming in the season knowing it was not going to go well. Like, it's just one of those things that I don't really understand. But on to the matchup itself. Tommy DeVito in 2023, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 64% completion rate. He's going up against a Tampa Bay defense that has actually let teams move quite a bit through the air. They're third most in passing yards per game allowed this season. 20 passing touchdowns is allowed, which is allowed as well, which is fifth most. So there's plenty of opportunity, I would say, in this game here for Tommy DeVito to maybe find some success here. You also have Baker Mayfield, who's going to go up against the Giants, and the way their defense has played this year, it's actually been a pretty good unit, all things considered. 184 yards per game allowed through the air, and their pass rush has been really good in New York. They're first in sack rate as the only team above a 10% threshold there. They have 36 sacks, which is second in the league. But the big thing for me that I think is going to make the difference here, because it sounds like he's not going to be limited unless he wants to be, wide receiver Mike Evans is back, and that is going to be massive for Tampa Bay. I think that he is really going to reopen this offense, helps find some stability in that locker room that really needs it in the wide receiver room specifically right now, as they've just been searching for someone to get hot after both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down in the same game. So this is good for them. I think that this will be kind of what helps Tampa Bay get somewhat back on schedule and maybe fighting for a spot in the NFC South as a divisional winner, because right now, the way the Falcons are playing, it doesn't seem like they want to win the division anymore. So I don't want to say it's wide open, because it's technically not, but Tampa Bay does have an opportunity to strike here with Atlanta fumbling. On top of that, whoever dominates on the ground, I think, has a good chance of winning this game. The way I look at it, Tampa Bay, they went from one of the worst rushing offenses last year to a top 10 unit. In one calendar year, it has improved unbelievably. Between Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Sean Tucker, you have a literal three-headed monster that you can work with at running backs. Tyrone Tracy on the flip side for the Giants, he's been excellent as well, and someone who I honestly want to see get more totes with the rock. He is someone that this offense should really lean on now that they've moved on from Daniel Jones completely. You have Tyrone Tracy, who's racked up 550 yards, about 5.1 yards per attempt on the season. Like, he has been extremely effective in the 100 or so attempts that he's been given. So I would love to see New York really try to lean into him now. I think whatever team controls the ground game does have a good shot at winning this football game, but the big deciding factor for me overall, as optimistic as I might have just sounded right there for New York, the Giants are still scoring about 15.5 points per game this year. Now, you can kind of throw that number out the window, technically speaking, because now that Daniel Jones, I always look at it as when you change quarterbacks, a lot of those offensive numbers do kind of go out the window in the sense that they could get better, they could get worse. Like, this is not necessarily exactly reflective of what the offense is, because the quarterback dictates a lot of the pace of the football game for an offense. But they're still 32nd in the league in scoring, and I don't know if Tommy DeVito is necessarily an upgrade over Daniel Jones. That will remain to be seen. We'll find that out. Tampa Bay, though, scoring about 28 points per game right now. As much as I really enjoy what they've been doing on defense in New York, I do think Tampa Bay can find some success, like Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns and company over there, Azeez Ojulari. They've been really good at making quarterbacks uncomfortable. But Baker Mayfield's one of those guys that never really seems fazed or uncomfortable despite what's going on around him. So I'll take the Bucs 23-17. I think their defense over there in New York maybe could give them some problems, but I think I like the Buccaneers here. Next, we have the Dallas Cowboys heading into Washington to take on the Commanders. And I'll be honest, I would love to make this sound interesting, but I don't really know if I can. With Cooper Rush coming in as the quarterback once again, the Cowboys having virtually no ability to run the football, the Dallas right now scoring under 20 points per game, whereas Washington's sitting at 28. They're fourth best in the NFL. The Cowboys pass rush is non-existent right now. Obviously, Micah Parsons is back, and that's great, but the fact that he leads the team in pressures with 35, that being 10 more than the next person behind him, and he missed 4 games this season, I think speaks volumes to where they are. I know obviously DeMarcus Lawrence is missing as well still because of the injury he's dealing with, but this is, I guess, a trap game for Washington, but it's in Washington. They should be winning this football game. I'll be curious to see how the weather looks, because there's a lot of rain kind of flowing through the Northeast right now. So I'm curious to see. It doesn't sound like there's supposed to be rain, or there's a slight chance, but it should be pretty clear. I'll be curious to see if that has any effect to it. But Washington should win this game and win it pretty handedly. And I think a lot of teams are about to be beating up on the Cowboys. And it started with the Eagles, and I think it's just going to kind of keep happening from there. I'll take the Commanders 31-10. Not going to fluff it up. They should win. Denver going into Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. Two things that I have in mind, and it's all about the defensive front of both of these teams here that really stick out to me. Denver's pass rush is championship level through and through. With the guys that they have over there, they're the best pass rush in the NFL, in my opinion, to put it simply. They're first in sacks with 39. They're third in sack rate, sixth in pressure rate, but they are a unit that, combined with the secondary that's playing really well, led by Pat Surtain, Brandon Jones, they are as effective on defense against the pass as literally anyone in the NFL right now. But that defensive front alone is a nightmare. And for Las Vegas, allowing 33 sacks already this season, which is good for sixth most. They're fifth highest in pressure rate allowed, 10th highest sack rate allowed. Whoever the quarterback is, it sounds like it's going to be Gardner Minshew, but if somebody else ends up stepping in for whatever the reason may be, if it's Desmond Ridder, or I don't know if Aiden O'Connell's back from injury yet. I think he's still hurt. But for whatever it's worth, whoever the quarterback is in Las Vegas, after what we saw from Denver last week against Atlanta, like cross your fingers, say your prayers. On the flip side, to focus on pass rush a little bit more here, you look at Las Vegas. If they can't disrupt Bo Nix, again, what we saw between Denver and Atlanta last week could wind up being the same end result here as well. Bo Nix versus no pressure this season, sitting on about 2,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions with a 72% completion rate, 101.5 passer rating. One of the most effective guys in the league right now when not facing pressure. A rookie quarterback. One of the most effective quarterbacks in the NFL without pressure. Torched the Falcons last week for 4 touchdowns and 300 yards, and that was something I talked about in my preview in that game. Atlanta being the worst pass rush in the league, I specifically said if they could not make Bo Nix uncomfortable, he could have a field day against them. He could expose their defense because he is a gamer. He's actually very accurate, good decision maker. And on top of that, Sean Payton has put together an offense that is so efficient around him. It's so well designed in terms of getting guys open and helping him get to where he needs to get the football. It's incredible. Las Vegas, they're bottom 5 in sacks and in pressure rate. Max Crosby accounts for 6.5 of the 19 sacks that this team has. That's a literal third of the sacks for the whole football team. If they can't stop Bo Nix, or at least make him slightly uncomfortable, and if the offensive line cannot hold up against what Denver's doing up front there, this game is won and lost in the trenches, period. And I'm taking Denver. 27-13, I think it's another pretty comfortable win for the Broncos. They are playing unbelievable defense, and if Bo Nix is comfortable, the offense is running and humming as well. I like the direction Denver's in right now. So Broncos fans, you've got plenty of reason to be excited right now. This next one here, this one is marred by injuries, man, and it makes this game extremely difficult. San Francisco going into Green Bay. 49ers are 5-5. Must-win situation right now. Packers skating by with a very tight victory against the Bears last week. Blocked field goal and all. You have, especially on the 49ers end, a lot of injury concern here, and it really complicates the outlook of this game. And I'm kind of operating under the assumption that there's not going to be Brock Purdy on the football field. That's kind of the assumption I'm operating under, so I feel like I should preface my prediction with that. I am expecting that there's either A, no Brock Purdy, or B, an unhealthy Brock Purdy, and that might be an issue as well. So it's either Brandon Allen and Josh Dobbs who are going to be working the quarterback room. Sounds like Brandon Allen is the guy that's going to get the first shot, and then they'll go from there. But I expect for the 49ers offense, heavy lean on Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. When you look at what both Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey have done in their careers as runners, this is one of those situations where, like, if Brock Purdy's not in, and even if he is in and he's not 100% healthy, this is a game where these two guys could combine for like 30-plus touches on the ground out of necessity more than anything else, because I don't know if you really want Brandon Allen or Josh Dobbs throwing the football over 20 times in this game here if you want to try to win. So I think you try to go after a run defense that hasn't necessarily been the best this year. They're about average or so, 14th in rushing yards per game allowed is Green Bay. So I expect a lot of running the football and a lot of creativity coming from Kyle Shanahan and what this offense can do with McCaffrey and Samuel. The other injuries, though, to be concerned about with the 49ers, Trent Williams and Nick Bosa, both DNPs for Wednesday and Thursday. So it sounds like they're not going to play for the most part. And a lot of people I was doing some scrolling around just to kind of see like where everyone's heads are at with all these injuries. And a lot of 49ers people seem to think there's going to be a handful of starters missing in this game, which is not where you want to be. And as the time of me recording this, there's no definite answer on any of these guys, but there is a good feeling that these guys might not be playing. Obviously, I could be totally wrong. Maybe they practiced today and I just haven't seen a report yet because I'm recording before that comes out. Whatever it may be, we'll cross that bridge and we'll find out. But injuries just have me so worried about San Francisco. And for me, like if Green Bay comes in and San Francisco is this hurt, as long as they take care of the football, because they have been dealing with some turnover troubles, and they don't, Jordan Love, he's thrown an interception in every single game this season, and he's had a few games where he's had a handful of interceptions. So it's like, if you can just protect the football, not make any mistakes, and you're going up against a San Fran defense that is still pretty good, minus Nick Bosa, maybe not as good, but still a pretty talented group of guys altogether. I just look at it as this one's tough. This one's really tough. And I think I'm leaning Packers, but I am so uncertain about this game, to be completely honest with you all that are watching. So I'm leaning Green Bay, but with so many injuries on San Francisco's side, my first initial thought looking at this matchup is like, this is maybe with the Packers looking the way they did last week in San Francisco and gotta have it situation right now after their loss to Seattle. Like, this is a good game for them to win, but minus Brock Purdy, or a not 100% Brock Purdy, and minus some of the other guys that seem like they're going to miss, I just have a really hard time going San Fran here. So I'll take the Packers 21-20. My final score should tell you how I feel about the certainty of this pick here. But I'm going to go Green Bay. They just kind of feel like the safer bet in this one with everything that I currently know and don't know at this moment about the game. Cardinals heading into Seattle. This is a fun one, man. The Arizona Cardinals, a team that I have, and Cardinals fans, feel free to say what you want about me because, believe me, I get it. I deserve everything. Arizona Cardinals, I have called them the most talent-depleted roster in the NFL so many times this season. I have since rescinded that and apologized for it because you can't be the most talent-depleted team and be leading your division. The Cardinals have surprised me in every single way, and it all starts with James Conner. And this is someone who I'm well aware of is one of the more underappreciated running backs in the NFL. You don't need to tell me that. I'm well aware. He has been that way since he's left Pittsburgh. He ranks inside the top 20 in rushing yards, yards per attempt, and rushing touchdowns this season. And going up against a Seattle defense that is allowing 138 yards per game on the ground, 4.8 yards per attempt, and has the 5th lowest run stuff rate in the NFL, there is a chance that James Conner continues that quiet but very effective season that he is currently working on right now. The other thing that I'm watching here, and this is going to be an interesting one, because the secondary in Arizona, again, not going to keep saying the whole talent depleted thing, but secondary in Arizona is something to keep an eye on going up against guys like DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Tyler Lockett. There is a lot of talent in that wide receiver room. They've helped Geno Smith reach the 2,800 passing yards that he has this year, which is currently 4th most in the NFL, and he's played one game less than the 3 guys in front of him, so he could very well be in first place if he wasn't a game behind those 3 guys. And when you look at Arizona allowing somewhere in the top or in the bottom third of the NFL in terms of yards per game allowed, or I guess top third because we're talking most yards, and then 4th most in terms of, or 14th most in yards per play allowed, there's a chance that maybe Geno Smith finds some success throwing the football here. However, there is some weather to be worried about, and I'm very curious to see how this affects this quarterback matchup as a whole, because like I said, Geno Smith been throwing the football a lot, but he also has 11 touchdowns to 11 picks. But interceptions aside, he's been pretty effective with the football, 70% completion rate or just about. And I mean, he's first, like I said, in passing yards per game, 4th overall in total numbers, but that's because he's a game behind. When you go yards per game, he is first place. I'm curious to see, though, how this rain might affect what happens here. It almost feels like there's a chance that we see a lot more of a run-heavy style of offense from both these teams where like they're playing off play action, just trying to be tricky and getting the ball into places where they can fool the defense and try not to put the ball in a ton of traffic, because when it gets wet, the ball gets slippery. It sometimes comes out weird, and then if it's going into a ton of traffic, it's sometimes not the most accurate throw in the world. And that's where I think I lean more Arizona here, because Kyler Murray, good at throwing the football, 12 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's just about a 70% completion rate himself. But what he's doing on the ground is what really impresses me right now. The 8.1 yards per carry that he has every time he takes off with the football. He has been dicing up defenses on the ground and being problematic every single week. Even in losses, he's constantly keeping defenses on their heels. And again, in a game where it's going to be wet, it's going to be slippery, a guy like him becomes even more dangerous. And I'm not going to say Geno Smith can't run, because we have seen Geno Smith. He can move coming out of the pocket too. But Kyler Murray he's the top tier in those upper echelon of the running quarterbacks right now. It's like Lamar Jackson, him, Josh Allen, those guys. Like Kyler Murray moves. So that is something that is weighing on my mind as well and is leading me towards a Cardinals win here. And I think I'm going to go like 28-24 Arizona. I could see the rain maybe causing defenses to slip, making things a little bit ugly for them, making it tough to defend some things. But I do think running games win out, and some of that running for Arizona is going to come from Kyler Murray. And I just feel like it could be a problem for Seattle's defense, which has shown some problems this season against running quarterbacks or just guys that can move on the ground overall. So I'll take Arizona 28-24. Fun victory in Seattle. Probably going to be a messy game with the way the rain's looking. Again, 70% chance of rain. Odds are you're going to see something. So ground attacks win out in this one here. And then we're looking at Philadelphia heading into LA to take on the Rams. This one under a canopy. There is going to be rain in the area, but they're under a canopy in LA, so they don't have to worry about that. First thing I have here is the Rams O-line dealing with the Eagles defensive front that has just gotten so good over the last, I want to say, like 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. They have really put it together after what was kind of a tough start to the season. The first week of Jonah Jackson and Steve Avila was not great. Stafford got sacked 4 times. He was under some pressure. It was not a great performance. And honestly, kind of a surprising one, in my opinion, against a Miami team that hasn't necessarily been super impressive as a pass rush. They can create some pressure, but they don't necessarily finish a lot. But they got after Matthew Stafford there. Second week, they looked a lot better going up against the Patriots. 9 pressures allowed, but not a single sack to be told. That was a much better performance and more on par with what I expected. Philadelphia is a top 10 team in both sack rate and total sacks with 28 on the season. This could be an interesting matchup to kind of figure out where this Rams O-line actually is with returning pieces like those two guys here. And if they've gelled back in and they're one cohesive unit again over there on the offensive line. The other thing that I'm going to be watching, and this is probably one of the most exciting like skill positional matchups we've seen this season. We have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, who have completely changed this offense since they've made their return, and obviously we all know how dynamic they are, but they're going up against rookie phenoms, yes, phenoms, Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean right now. According to PFF, Cooper DeJean has the 9th best coverage grade in the NFL. Again, take PFF numbers for what they're worth. I do like referencing them for some things here or there, and I think it says something that there are places that think this way, at the very least, about these players. PFF has DeJean ranked 9th best in coverage grade in the NFL. Quinion Mitchell, not too far behind, at 19th best coverage grade in the NFL. And if you want to throw Darius Slay in there as well, just for funsies, he's 24th. They have 3 corners in the top 25 of the NFL in coverage rating, according to PFF. That says a lot about how good these guys have been in that secondary. Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, especially considering they're rookies doing what they're doing here. Mitchell has allowed just 23 receptions on 45 targets. He's not seeing the ball really come his way that often. He's allowed 0 touchdowns, all those numbers per next-gen stats. DeJean himself, 20 receptions off of 30 targets allowed, no touchdowns on top of that as well. These two guys have been massive difference makers for a secondary that desperately needed to get younger going into this past offseason. And from the way it looks right now, are both nails selections for their team. And I'm really excited to watch the growth of these two guys, because it's not too often that a team gets a great quarterback in the draft, never mind two of them. So that's a matchup to keep an eye on there. Can those guys lock up Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, who have been an unbelievable tandem since returning from their injuries? Running back battle's obviously another one we're keeping an eye on here. You have Saquon Barkley. He leads the NFL, obviously, in rushing yards per game right now at 113. He is having a career season right now. 113, almost 114 yards per game is his career high right now. And then you have a guy like Kyron Williams, who's also been really effective out of the backfield as well. You have two really good running backs going head-to-head here, so this will be a fun one to watch. And then the Rams pass rush versus the Eagles O-line. I think this is a really good test for another young, talented group of guys. For all the praise that Philadelphia is getting for what they did in the secondary, the Rams deserve the same for what they did on the defensive line after losing Aaron Donald this offseason. Both Jared Verse, who's currently on like a defensive rookie of the year campaign, Braden Fisk and Byron Young, who has been on a tear as well, all creating a ton of pressure against quarterbacks. Eagles are about middle of the pack in terms of pressure allowed, and they've actually allowed the 12th most sacks with 29 on the year. This will be a good test, though, because the Eagles' offensive line is a pretty good unit, especially when it comes to opening up running lanes, so those guys up front will have their work cut out for them. As for who I think is going to win, though, I think I am leaning Philadelphia on this one here. The Rams kind of... I don't want to say that they killed my belief in them, but their loss to the Dolphins just really threw me off and was one that I did not expect to see from them. And that's one that I think they really let get away. And it's kind of hurt my belief in them. I'm still huge, obviously, on the receiving room they have there, what these young guys on the defense are doing for them. Obviously, I'm a big Matthew Stafford guy, so I don't want to make it sound like my belief is dead, but I am, a little bit more cautiously optimistic, I guess I should say, about the Rams and just where they currently stand. Whereas Philadelphia, they are riding hot on a 6-game winning streak right now. And again, when it comes to the battle in the trenches, I really like what Philadelphia is doing both offensively and defensively, and games are won and lost that way. I give the edge to Philly 27-24. I think the Rams keep it competitive, but I think the Eagles get the job done here on Sunday Night Football. And then to wrap up the week, we have ourselves Baltimore heading into Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. LA hosting a couple of games this week, a Sunday night game and a Monday night game. That must be a lot of fun if you're in that area. The Chargers' run defense are going to have their hands full. A really good unit going up against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Henry obviously leading the league in rushing touchdowns with 13 right now, and then Jackson and Henry combined for nearly 1,800 yards on the ground. They are as dynamic of a duo as everyone was anticipating them when the Henry signing was made official. That being said, the Chargers defense on the ground has been no slouch. They are only sitting on 3 touchdowns allowed. We are in week 12, and you have 3 rushing touchdowns allowed. That's a crazy stat right there. Coupled with the fact that they're allowing just 110 yards per game, which puts them in the best group of the top third of the NFL. And it's worth noting that this is, and we talked about this earlier, another one of those teams that and we were talking, I think it was the Texans we were talking about it with, 4th fewest rush attempts against them, allowing 4.7 yards per attempt. So they've been good against the run. They've hardly allowed any rushing touchdowns, but one has to wonder if it's because teams are passing more against them than anything else, and whether that has to do with teams just trying not to run against them because of how good they are, or something is, like the truth lies somewhere in the middle of there. But again, something I think is worth pointing out here considering how low the rushing attempts number is against them. The other thing I'm watching is, of course, Justin Herbert going against that Baltimore secondary there. Justin Herbert, 0 interceptions in his last 8 games. He's been finding a ton of success throwing to guys like Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Will Dissly, the tight end, and it's been impressive because a lot of people looked at Los Angeles like that team that had the worst skill position group in the NFL. They had them lower than the New England Patriots. In my opinion, kind of crazy because the way they look right now, I don't think you'd still say that. I think you would probably put the Patriots at 32 at this point in the season. But Baltimore, they've been allowing 284 passing yards per game allowed, which is the most by a pretty decent margin. Less than an interception per game coming from them as well. They have not done a great job of defending the football through the air. They did have some good success last week against the Steelers, but overall, for the most part, they have struggled. And granted, they've faced some high-flight offenses, but I would like to see some better performances from the Ravens, especially in the secondary there. And then last but certainly not least, the thing that I'm looking at here, how J.K. Dobbins, who has been kind of the lifeblood of this offense, who has kept things churning on the ground for them whenever they needed absolutely most. And you can look back as recently as their win on Monday Night Football against the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against Baltimore, who has the second fewest rushing yards per game allowed behind only the Vikings, the fewest yards per attempt allowed, then the 8th best run stuff rate, and the fewest runs over 10 yards allowed. This has been one of the most efficient run defenses in the NFL. They are so tough up front with the guys that they have over there, and I'm very curious to see if J.K. Dobbins is able to find any sort of success there. As for who I think is going to win, this is one that I've been going back and forth on because the Ravens are in a situation now, especially with the Steelers dropping a game, like they've got to win this one because the chance to steal the division is there now. The Steelers hiccuped, and you have the opportunity to take advantage now. So it's like must win for the Ravens in that sense, but like they don't have to win necessarily, but for the division, you've got to get it done here. And then you have the Chargers, who at 7-3 have been a really good football team, but I do kind of feel like they might be due for a loss here. I'm not sure. This is a really tough one for me as well. And again, I've been going back and forth on it quite a bit. I do think defenses win out a little bit more in this one here. I could see the score being a little bit on the lower end, but I think I'm going to go Baltimore for the victory on this one here for them to get the job done. I believe in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And like I said, the one thing, the run defense stuff, again, the 3 touchdowns allowed is a really impressive number here. Being inside the top third of the NFL in terms of rushing yards per game allowed is also a great stat line. But that 4.7 yards per attempt is something that I keep thinking about. And again, the 4th fewest rushing attempts against them leads me to wonder if it's partly because their rushing numbers are so low that they've allowed, or is partly because teams are just not running as much against them for whatever that reason may be. So that's something that I'm curious to see because we know Baltimore, they'll run the football. They will get after it on the ground if they're finding success. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for this run defense over there in LA. But yes, Ravens for the win, and those are my picks going into week number 12 of the NFL. As always, comment down below. Let me hear from you. Share your thoughts, your opinions. What am I getting right and wrong? All of that. Would love to hear. But as always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.